All right, so uh, this one, this whole Tulsi Gabbard thing as
Yeah.
Director of National Intelligence under Trump, you shared some fascinating sources, and I'm kind of scratching my head here. I mean, she defended Snowden and Assange. Now she's in charge of U.S. intelligence.
Yeah, it's definitely a head scratcher. I mean, it really goes to the heart of this question that's been swirling around Gabbard for years. Like, is she really, a principal maverick, or is there something else going on here? Something maybe even a little dangerous.
Well, okay, so let's go back to the Snowden and Assange stuff for a second, just to refresh everyone's memory.
Mm.
These are guys who leaked classified information,
Yeah.
exposing all those government surveillance programs that a lot of people thought were way over the line.
Yeah.
And Gabbard didn't just defend them publicly, right? She actually went and introduced legislation to protect whistleblowers.
Yeah, and what's striking is she's really going after both sides on this. I mean,
Wow.
she's criticized Democrats and Republicans,
Yeah.
saying, they're both eroding civil liberties in the name of national security. And remember, this is someone who wants to repeal the Patriot Act. That's a pretty big deal.
Absolutely. So how do we square that strong anti-surveillance stance with her taking this job? I mean, she's now leading the very intelligence apparatus she's been so critical of.
Right. That's the million-dollar question. I mean, one possibility is that she really thinks she can reform the system from the inside. Like, maybe this is her chance to rein things in,
Yeah.
to get the intelligence community to be more restrained in their approach.
Okay, I get that. But what about the critics who say all this lines up a little too neatly with what Russia's been pushing? I mean, her skepticism of U.S. intelligence, her questioning U.S. support for Ukraine, that controversial meeting with Assad, doesn't that paint a bit of a concerning picture?
Yeah, that's a valid concern for sure. And it's something that's come up again and again throughout her career. That Assad meeting in particular really sparked a lot of backlash. But, to her credit, Gabbard's always defended her actions, saying dialogue is essential for peace, even if it means talking to unsavory figures.
I mean, I get that in principle, but is that naive? We're talking about Assad here. He's a brutal dictator, responsible for God knows how many atrocities. Isn't there a real danger in legitimizing him by even meeting with him?
There's definitely a risk, but I think it's important to understand where she's coming from. Gabbard's whole foreign policy is built around this idea of non-interventionism. She thinks the U.S. meddles too much in other countries' affairs and that it often backfires. So in her view, engaging with leaders like Assad, however distasteful it may be, sometimes that's the only way to prevent more bloodshed and instability.
So is this principled pacifism, like her supporters say? Or is there something more cynical going on here? Is she genuinely trying to change U.S. foreign policy, or is it more about disrupting the establishment, even if that means siding with some pretty questionable figures?
Honestly, it's hard to say for sure what her motivations are. But what's fascinating about Gabbard is that she doesn't fit neatly into any box. She's a Democrat who's embraced by some on the right, an anti-war advocate who served in the military, a critic of government surveillance who's now in charge of intelligence gathering.
Okay, so we've established that she's a complex figure with some seemingly contradictory positions. But let's try to connect the dots here. If we look at her journey from Democratic Congresswoman running for president to being endorsed by Trump and becoming a Republican, is there a thread that runs through all of that?
I think the common denominator is her populist anti-establishment streak. Throughout her career, she's positioned herself as an outsider, someone willing to challenge both parties and the status quo. And she's really tapped into that sense of discontent among voters who feel like the elites have abandoned them.
Some people are even accusing her of straight up parroting Russian propaganda, blaming NATO expansion for the war and all that.
Right, and it's not just NATO. She's also pushed that whole theory about U.S.-funded biolabs in Ukraine, which has been completely debunked, but it's gained a lot of traction in certain circles,
Yeah.
especially among folks who are sympathetic to Russia.
And it's not just fringe voices saying this. You've got people like Mitt Romney and Adam Kinzinger, both Republicans, publicly calling her out, saying her views are dangerous and harmful. They're arguing that she's giving legitimacy to Russian disinformation, which is obviously trying to undermine Western support for Ukraine.
Yeah, it's a tough one because while she's been critical of U.S. support for Ukraine, she has also condemned the invasion itself. So it's not as simple as saying she's pro-Russia. It's definitely more complicated than that.
It's almost like she's trying to find this third path.
Yeah.
One that's different from both the pro-interventionists who want full support for Ukraine
Right.
and the pro-Russia camp who blame the West for everything.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. When you look at her foreign policy overall, there's this consistent skepticism of U.S. interventionism. She seems to want a more hands-off approach, one that prioritizes diplomacy and avoids direct military involvement.
Which, to be fair, is something a lot of Americans are starting to agree with. People are tired of endless wars and skeptical of the U.S. acting as the world's police.
Absolutely.
Are there legitimate questions about her experience and whether she's actually qualified to be DNI?
Right. She's never worked in intelligence before. And some critics are saying that her time in Congress and the military just doesn't give her the experience she needs for a job this demanding.
I mean, the DNI oversees a massive network of intelligence agencies. With a budget of billions of dollars and hundreds of thousands of employees, it's a complicated and challenging job. You need to really understand intelligence gathering and analysis and all the different national security threats the country faces.
Absolutely. And the stakes are incredibly high. The DNI plays a huge role in shaping how the president sees the world and informing policy decisions that can literally have life or death consequences.
So is there anything in her background that suggests she can actually handle this?
Or supporters point to her time on the House Armed Services Committee. They say that's where she got exposure to the intelligence community and built relationships with key people in the field. They also highlight her military service, saying it gave her the discipline, the leadership skills, and the understanding of national security that she needs for this job.
But is that really enough to prepare someone to lead the entire intelligence community? I mean, being in Congress is very different from running a giant bureaucracy.
Yeah, that's a good point. And it's worth remembering that the DNI position is relatively new. It was created after 9/11 to try to improve coordination between the different intelligence agencies. So there isn't really a clear path to becoming DNI.
True. And in some ways, her unconventional background might actually be an advantage. She brings a fresh perspective and a willingness to challenge the way things are done.
Yeah.
Throughout my life, whether through serving in the military or in Congress, I've always worked to do what is in the best interest of our country. I could not in good conscience vote either yes or no. I am standing in the center and decided to vote present. I could not in good conscience vote against impeachment because I believe President Trump is guilty of wrongdoing. I also could not in good conscience vote for impeachment because removal of a sitting president must not be the culmination of a partisan process fueled by tribal animosities that have so gravely divided our country. So when I cast my vote in support of the impeachment inquiry nearly 3 months ago, I said that in order to maintain the integrity of this solemn undertaking, it must not be a partisan endeavor. Tragically, that's what it has been. On the one side, the president's defenders are insisting that he has done nothing wrong. They agree with this absurd proclamation that his conduct was, quote unquote, perfect. They've abdicated their responsibility to exercise legitimate oversight and are instead blindly doing the bidding of their party's leader. On the other side, the president's opponents insist that if we do not impeach, our country will collapse into dictatorship. All but explicitly, they accuse him of treason. This extreme rhetoric was never conducive to an impartial fact-finding process. Now, the founders of our country made very clear their concerns about impeachment being a purely partisan exercise. In the Federalist Papers, Alexander Hamilton warned against any impeachment that would merely, quote, connect itself with the pre-existing factions and enlist all their animosities, partialities, influence, and interest on one side or on the other. In such cases, he said, there will always be the greatest danger that the decision will be regulated more by the comparative strength of parties than by the real demonstrations of innocence or guilt. Donald Trump has violated the public trust. Congress must be unequivocal in denouncing the president's misconduct and stand up for the American people and our democracy. To this end, I've introduced a censure resolution that will send a strong message to this president and future presidents that their abuses of power will not go unchecked, while leaving the question of removing Trump from office to the voters to decide. I'm confident that the American people will decide to deliver a resounding rebuke of President Trump's innumerable improprieties and abuses, and they will express that judgment at the ballot box. That's the way real and lasting change has always occurred in this great country, through the forcefully expressed will of the people. A house divided cannot stand. Today, we are divided. Fragmentation and polarity are ripping our country apart. This breaks my heart and breaks the hearts of all patriotic Americans, whether we are Democrats, Republicans, or independents. So today, I come before you to make a stand for the center, to appeal to all of you, to bridge our differences and stand up for the American people. My vote today is a vote for much needed reconciliation and hope that together we can heal our country. Let's work side by side, seeking common ground to usher in a bright future for the American people and our country.